It's just, I just want to salute you all. I mean, this state has really become the engine of growth for the U.S. economy, and so it's exciting for me to be here with you. Scott, thanks so much for the nice introduction. I also, in addition to working for the Wall Street Journal, by the way, how many of you in this room read the Wall Street Journal pretty regularly? Thank you for helping pay my salary. It is a great newspaper, and I don't care if you read the news side, but please do read the editorials every morning. Those are the ones that I help write and work for. And this may sound like a little bit of a self-serving thing to say, but the one advice I give to audiences around the country, whether it's college kids or business leaders or investors, if you want to be the smartest person in the room, the one way you can do that is by just taking 10 or 15 minutes out of your morning when you're having your Starbucks coffee and just reading those 3 editorials every day. We cover everything from financial issues to the economy to politics to what's happening with the global situation, and I think you'll just find it to be a great source for wisdom and knowledge about what's happening in the country. We also have a strategic alliance, by the way, obviously now, since most of you know, Rupert Murdoch 3 years ago bought the Wall Street Journal, so it's been a new partnership, and obviously Rupert Murdoch owns Fox News and News Corp, so we have a strategic partnership with Fox, and we also have a working arrangement with CNBC TV, and so I do a lot of those shows. By the way, how many of you in this room watch Fox News pretty regularly? A lot of you do. What would we do without Fox News, right? It has really been fun to work with Fox. You know, the motto, by the way, of Fox News is fair, balanced, and blonde, right? And that is true, having worked there. But the other day I was in California. I was in San Diego, and I arrived very late in the evening and got off my plane, and I'm lugging my luggage through the airport, and this little old lady, she just ran up to me and she threw her arms around me, and it was kind of endearing, and it kind of shocked me, and she was so cute. She said, "I know you, don't I?" And I said, "Well, ma'am, I'm not really sure." She said, "Haven't I seen you on TV?" And I said, it was kind of teasing her a little bit. I said, "Well, I don't know, ma'am. What do you watch?" And that kind of confused her, and she kind of scratched her head a little bit. She looked up at me again, and she said, "Wait a minute." She said, "Didn't I see you on Wheel of Fortune last week?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, that was me." You know, I have to say, it's one of the fun things about being here today is the reason I was out in California last weekend is I made the mistake of doing the Bill Maher show on HBO. Hopefully, none of you in this room watched that show, but it's a political show, extremely liberal audience and liberal panelists. And so last week I was on the show with I'm trying to remember the other panelists were Alec Baldwin, Michael Moore, and Barney Frank. And that was their idea of a balanced panel. And by the way, it's 300 people in the audience who all look like they're members of Occupy Wall Street. So anyway, that was a tough job being in front of those people. All right, let me talk a little bit about what is going on with this economy and where I think it's headed and how I think elections are going to play such an important role in terms of how this economy performs after January of next year. And let me start by saying this. I'm a big believer that most of the things that we've done in Washington in the last 3 years in the face of what has now become the worst recession since the Great Depression, this has been, it's been almost 4 years since the economy collapsed, remember, in September, October of 2008 when all the big banks failed and we had the housing market tumbling and the subprime crisis. So it's been almost 4 years since that has happened. And look, I'm a free market conservative economist, so I don't believe in the power of big government. And I would make the case that most of the things, if not everything, that Washington has done to try to deal with this recession has actually been exactly the wrong thing to do, and that we've actually made this recession much deeper, much stronger, much lengthier, and much more painful than it would have been if we had done the right things. And you know, if you think about the last 4 years, this has been, if you look at job creation, and your state is such a an outlier here, but if you look at job creation in the rest of the country, this has been by far the weakest recovery we've had from a recession since the Great Depression. In fact, I was looking at the statistics recently. If you look at the last 8 recessions, we've had 8 post-World War II recessions. In every one of those recessions, except for this one, at this stage of the economic cycle, we had recovered every single job that had been lost. In fact, normally at this stage of an economic cycle, you'd see being a boom going on. If you look at what happened, for example, in the Reagan years at this stage, I mean, we experienced 5, 6, 7, 8% growth. We were experiencing, we had 1 month in the Reagan expansion where we had 1.1 million jobs in 1 month. So normally we would experience much, much more rapid growth, and that's what we should have experienced. And I think one of the things that really deterred that kind of growth was the policy mistakes that were made and compounded the problems with the economy in 2008. And those have to do with everything from the bailouts that happened, and those happened under the last months of George W. Bush's presidency, and then we had, of course, the gargantuan trillion-dollar economic stimulus bill, which in my opinion was one of the most expensive policy failures in the history of this country. And then we had, remember you all remember the Cash for Clunkers program, and we had that, and we had the bailout of the auto companies. We've had something like 4 mortgage modification programs where taxpayers have been actually financing people who aren't paying their mortgages to have to make their mortgage payments. I have a bumper sticker on my car back home in Virginia, and it says, "Honk if I paid your mortgage." And everywhere I go, people are honking at me. This is a big problem that everybody's paying for everyone else's mortgage right now. And if you total up all of the money that has been spent over the last 4 years, I think it's a real problem for our country. If you look at, let's just talk for a minute about the debt situation, because I think this is the biggest cloud on the horizon. And by the way, I do think the economy is in a fairly strong recovery right now. The problem with this recovery is that it's built on debt. And so if you look over the last 4 years, the last Bush administration year and the first 3 years of the Obama administration, we have borrowed $5.1 trillion. Now, let me say that again. We've borrowed $5.1 trillion with a T, dollars in the last 4 years. Now, that's a huge number, and it's almost incomprehensibly large, but let me put that in perspective. $5.1 trillion in borrowing is more money than the United States government borrowed from 1776 through 2005. That's amazing, isn't it? I mean, so think about that. We've borrowed more money in 4 years than we borrowed to finance the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, World War I, World War II, the Great Depression, and the Cold War. That is a big problem. My wife on her car, she has a bumper sticker that says, "Thank God Barack Obama doesn't know what comes after a trillion." And I love that bumper sticker too, because whew, thank goodness. But these are really daunting numbers, and I just want to tell you, because I think the numbers are so frighteningly large that again, I think that they've become so big that we've become almost anesthetized to their impact. And when I'm at home, I'm on the road a lot, but when I'm at home, I try to tell I have 3 sons. I have 2 teenagers who I don't like very much, but I have an 8-year-old who I'm very fond of. And so, when I'm at home, I try to tell my 8-year-old son a bedtime story. And so one night I thought I would tell David a little story about the national debt, because after all, he's going to have to pay it off, so I thought he should know something about it. So I said, "David, do you know how much $1 trillion is?" And his eyes glazed over. So I said, "Well, David, I'll ask you a question you do know the answer to." I said, "Who's the greatest basketball player in the world?" And he instantly said, "LeBron James." So then he's an encyclopedic knowledge of the NBA. So I asked David, I said, "David, how much money does LeBron James make?" And he knew that too. He instantly knew that when you include all the endorsements that LeBron makes and his salary with the Miami Heat, that LeBron James makes $40 million a year. By the way, is this a great country or what? You can make $40 million a year to play basketball. So then I posed this question to my son David, and I'll pose the same one to you all. How many seasons do you think LeBron James would have to play basketball at $40 million a season to have $1 trillion? The answer is 25,000 seasons. 25,000 seasons at a 40 million gets you $1 trillion. So these numbers are gigantic, and we put ourselves in a huge hole. Now, The economy is expanding right now. There is absolutely no question about it. I think we're going to see, at least for the next 4 or 5 months, really strong and robust growth, healthy job numbers, and I think that's fantastic. We're finally starting to claw our way out of this recession. The real question is how durable this expansion will be. And one of the things that worries me the most about sustaining this expansion, which normally, you know, a normal expansion lasts 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 years. Normally what you need is a sound fiscal policy. And one of the things, kind of the headline that I want you to walk away from this is that the biggest danger to the U.S. economy right now, unquestionably in my mind, is the tax time bomb that is set to detonate on January 1st. Scott, I do Scott Hennon's radio show regularly, and Scott, you and I talk about this all the time. It is a big problem, and not enough people in the business community and investors are focusing on this. But if we allow the current course to be played out on January 1, 2013, this is what is going to happen. The capital gains tax is going to go up. The dividend tax is going to go up. The small business tax is going to go up. The payroll tax is going to go up. You're talking about a tax increase of over $1 trillion. The rates on investment, the rates on small businesses are all headed up. I think that's a very dangerous thing, and it's something everybody should be focused on now. Now, I want to show you a few charts to kind of dramatize why I think, where I think we've headed and where we've gone as kind of a prelude to our panel discussion. And I'm just going to kind of whip through this because you know, I don't have a lot of time, but I just want to show you some of the kind of highlights of this. This first chart is basically the U.S. economy, the stock market over the last 50 years. And if you look at this chart, what's interesting about it is you can see that, after the terrible 1970s, you know, we had this incredible bull market expansion in this country that lasted 20 years. What you're looking at when you look at that period from around 1980 to 2000, that peak on the stock market, that is the greatest period of prosperity in the history of this country. Or in fact, I would make the case no country anywhere has ever achieved that level of prosperity. We saw for example, the Dow Jones went from 800 to 13,000 over that period, and you can see it was an unbelievably bullish period where we created something like 35 million jobs. We had huge increase in middle income salaries and so on. So it was an incredible period of prosperity. And then what I want to focus on just a minute is look at the tail end of that. I call this the double humped camel. And you can see what happens in 2000, the stock market and the economy crash. And that, of course, was when we had the dot-com bubble burst. You all remember that, when all the high technology stocks, so many of them went bankrupt and the dot-com bubble burst. And you can see on that chart that downward slope, that's about the equivalent of about $7 or $8 trillion of lost wealth when so many of those companies went bankrupt. Then you can see in around 2003 the economy recovers. We have a big 2003, 4, 5, 6, and 7. The economy does extraordinarily well. We have a very robust expansion, and then the economy collapses again at the end of 2008. And you can see that's obviously the housing bubble bursting, and you can see another $8 trillion of wealth is eviscerated. And you can see on this chart, it's not totally updated, but we've recovered about 2/3 of the losses from that last recession. And so the real question is, for our country, is can we get back out of that virtuous cycle that we saw in the 80s and 90s, where we're experiencing very healthy job growth, very robust increases in the stock market and incomes. And that's really the question we have to ask ourselves. Now, I would make a hypothesis to you that we can talk about in the question and answer session, which is one of the areas where we may be facing a third bubble, if you will. You can see the first two bubbles there, is in the bond market. And what's happening right now is that the Fed has been flushing the economy with easy money. And what's been happening with that money over the last 3 or 4 years is it's been put into bonds. People are terrified they're still very afraid to invest the money in the stock market and in risky ventures because of what happened at the end of 2008, and that money is flowing into bonds. So much so, I mean, this is the paradox. If you read the front page of the Wall Street Journal today, there's a good story on this, that today the interest rate on a 10-year Treasury bill is less than 2% interest. Now think about that. People are buying Treasury bills at 1.95% interest. Ladies and gentlemen, we have 3.5% inflation in the economy. So what does that mean? People are buying Treasury bills at a negative real interest rate. Scott, I don't think we've ever seen that happen. I don't think, or at least not since the Great Depression, have ever seen Americans so risk averse, they're willing to give the government their money and get it paid back at a rate where it actually adjusted for inflation. They're going to lose money. I do think one of the things, the predictions I will make to you, and Craig and Scott, if you're nice enough to have me back 2 years from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, I will bet anyone in this room that 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, interest rates are going to be a whole heck of a lot higher then than they are today. Now, that's not a very bold bet, is it? Interest rates can hardly go any lower than they are right now. I really believe, 30 years from now, when we're talking to our grandkids, we're going to say, there was a time, I remember, when you could get a mortgage for 4% interest, right? This is the golden age of low interest rates, and I think it's coming to an end. Now, the next thing I wanted to show you is taxes. This is my biggest worry about the economy, is the tax picture, and I love this chart because I think it tells the tax story so well. The big debate that's going to be going on, obviously Michigan and Arizona are voting today on the presidential Republican side of the aisle. Once the Republicans have picked their nomination, I think the centerpiece of the debate we're going to have in this country is over what the president calls fairness, right? He's going to make the case that we have to tax the rich, they're not paying their fair share, and so on. We need to get more revenues from the Warren Buffetts and the Tiger Woods and the Hannah Montanas of the country. And if you look at this chart, I think it shows why the president is so misguided on tax policy. If you look at the red line, that's what's happened to tax rates over the last 30 years. You can see what happens. In 1970, the highest tax rate was 70%. It came down to 50% in 1981 under the Reagan tax cut. A few years after that, it came down to 28%. That's a big deal. It's a two-thirds reduction in tax rates. It's no surprise you had the big boom in the stock market when tax rates went down like that. And then you can see they went up a little bit under Clinton and Bush. But here is the interesting part. Over that whole period, the top tax rate in the United States went from 70 to 35%. That is, it was cut in half. Now, look at the blue line. Look at this blue line. And by the way, as wonderful it is to be talking to you this morning, I cannot tell you how much I wish, sitting at this table right here, was Tim Geithner, Joe Biden, and Barack Obama. Because I think on these tax issues, they just don't have their tray tables in the upright and locked positions. Look, what the president keeps saying is we have to raise tax rates, right? Well, look at this blue line. The blue line is the share of taxes paid by the those quote evil richest 1%. Look at this. It's a paradox, isn't it? The share of taxes paid by the richest 1% actually increased as the tax rate went down, right? So, and if you look at that situation today, by the way, I want to show you, this is one of my favorite quotes from history. This is from John F. Kennedy, a Democrat, in 1963, shortly before he was tragically assassinated in Dallas, was selling a tax rate reduction, and he put it like this: it is a paradoxical truth that tax rates are too high today and tax revenues are too low. This is the part I love. He says, the soundest way to raise the revenues for the government in the long run is to cut the rates now. Well, he was exactly right about that in 1960. Now, isn't this interesting? First of all, the top 1% in America today pay 40% of the income tax. Raise your hand if you knew that statistic, that 1% pay 40% of the income tax. A lot of you do. You must read the Wall Street Journal editorial page. We hammer this message home almost every day. Most Americans have no idea of this. Most Americans think the top 1% pay less than 1% of the tax. Why? Because they've been brainwashed and inundated with this idea from the media that the rich don't pay their fair share. What's really amazing about this chart is that in 2007, for the first time in American history, the top 1 out of 100 Americans paid more in income tax than the bottom 95 out of 100 Americans. I don't know about you, but I find that to be a startling statistic. Now, if Robert Reich or some of these other liberal economists that I debate on these shows were here, they'd say, yeah, the rich pay all the taxes because they make all the income. Well, that's not exactly true either. If you look at these red pillars here, the top 1% have earned 23% of the income in the U.S. economy. That's admittedly a lot. It's more than any time since the 1920s. But interestingly enough, the people in that top 1%, the great thing, the admirable thing about the U.S. economy is that we are not a static society. People are moving in and out of these income categories all the time. The average length of time that someone stays in the top 1% is only 6 years. So the great thing about this country is anybody can get to the king of the mountain. It's not easy to stay there. But here's the most amazing part. Look at the bottom 50%. they pay 3% of, in fact, this statistic is a little out of date. They now pay 2.5% of the income tax. So by definition, that means people with an income above the median pay 97.5% of the tax. People at the bottom half pay 2.5%. One more amazing statistic that I find disturbing as an economist, the bottom 35 to 40%, you know what share of the tax burden they pay? Zero. Zero. They pay no tax at all. Now, Scott, you know me, you've known me for a long time. You know I'm a pretty anti-tax guy, right? I'm probably as anti-tax as anyone. But I do believe, and I wonder how many of you agree with me with this principle, that anyone in this country who is a citizen of our great country, who has a job, and who votes, everyone should pay some income tax, right? Everybody should pay some income tax. The idea that we've taken, how many of you agree with me on that, that everybody should pay some income tax in this country? And I think this is a problem. And by the way, Republicans are partly responsible for this. They keep taking Americans off the income tax rolls. Now, I want to just quickly go through a couple things and then turn this over to the panel. The inflation story, here it is. You know, you can see what happened in the 70s. How many of you in this room are old enough to remember when we had 14% inflation under Jimmy Carter? Remember that? And we had 20%, remember 20% mortgage interest rates and so on. And then you can see what happens is, you know, the way I put it is that the clouds dispersed, the sun came out, and God gave America Ronald Reagan. You know, look at what happened to the inflation rate when Reagan came into office. It went from 14.5% down to about 3%, which is a miracle. By the way, anybody remember who the Federal Reserve Chairman was at that time? It was Paul Volcker, and so I call this the Reagan-Volcker disinflation. And then you can see over the next 20 years, as the economy booms forward, we have very steady and stable inflation, and prices are under control, and that's what you want with your monetary policy. You want a very stable price system. Why do I show you that? Why is that relevant to today? Because of this. Now, monetary policy is a very boring topic, but I think this, if you haven't seen this chart before, it should knock your socks off. What this is showing you is the supply of money that's being essentially printed or ejected into the economy by the Fed through the banking system. And look at this. You can see over a 10 or 20 year period, the money supply is very stable, grows at a very stable rate. And then look at what happened with the supply of money in September of 2008. Boom, goes through the roof. By the way, how many of you in this room have seen this chart before? They show it a lot on CNBC. If you haven't seen it, it is really pretty startling. What this is saying is that in 2008, the Fed doubled the supply of money. Now, we all know this from Economics 100. What is inflation? What is inflation? Remember this? Inflation is too many dollars chasing too few goods, right? That's all inflation is. What is the long-term impact of injecting all that money into the economy? It's got to be inflationary. You can see that 2 or 3 years later, that money is still out there, so it hasn't been withdrawn yet. We haven't seen inflation yet, but I think we're starting to see it. As you see what's happening with gasoline prices and so on, I think we're starting to see the bitter fruits of that expansive monetary policy. There's your interest rate story. You can see interest rates went way up in the 60s and 70s, and then, you want to see a beautiful picture. Look at the interest rate story for the U.S. economy over the last 30 years. I mean, it just doesn't get any better than that. There are two reasons I believe that interest rates are probably headed up. One is that if inflation starts to tick up, and I do believe we're going to see, I'm not talking about catastrophic rates of inflation. I'm just saying we're probably going to see inflation go maybe to the 4 to 5% range. If that happens, interest rates have to go up too, right? Because interest rates and inflation go in the same pattern. So that's one reason I think you might see a 200 basis point increase in interest rates over the next couple of years. The other is because of the insane fiscal policy that we have where we're borrowing so much money. If the federal government's going to borrow $1 trillion a year, somebody has to lend the government that money, and I just find it hard to believe people are going to continue to lend the government money at 2 to 3% interest rates. I just wanted to touch for a second, if I could, on prices by industry, because this is really kind of, I think, an interesting picture of what's happened to the U.S. economy by industry. You can see the blue pillars are the consumer items like cars and trucks and clothing and textiles and software and computers. Those have all over the what this picture is telling you is that over the last 10 years we've actually had disinflation or deflation in consumer items. This is one of the benefits of competition and international trade and so on. It holds prices down for consumers. But look at this, isn't it interesting? Other than energy, which is a commodity, a special case, look at medical care and education. Those are the two industries in the entire U.S. economy that have had the largest price increase increases. And I have to tell you, I think that you have to ask the question, what's similar about those two? And Scott, you cannot answer this question, but what is the similarity between those two industries? Well, let me pose this question differently. Who supplies those industries in America? It's government, right? Now, we think that with Obamacare and so on, we've got our fingers crossed that Obamacare is going to actually hold down prices. Again, if the president were here, I'd say, Mr. President, when in history has that ever worked? Look at the huge increase in the cost of medical care in this country as Medicaid and Medicare have sort of taken over the system. And education is one that just sticks in my craw. I mentioned that I have two teenage boys. They're both in college. My oldest son recently went off to Northwestern, which is in Chicago. Anybody want to take a wild guess at what Northwestern costs right now, all in, room, board, and tuition? $62,000 a year. $62,000 a year. Ladies and gentlemen, that is thievery, right? How do they get away with charging those kinds of tuitions? In fact, you've probably gathered by now I'm a pretty conservative guy. Northwestern is one of the most conservative, liberal schools in the country. So the day before my son was going to go off to college, I said, look, Justin, I will make a deal with you. You can go to Northwestern for 4 years, or I will just write you a check for $200,000 and you play computer games for 4 years and we'll both be better off. He said, yeah, that sounded pretty good to him. But you have to wonder, is college worth $200,000? I think the answer to that question is no. A couple very quick last points and then I will sum up. By the way, if you want to see, let me just move back. This is kind of interesting. Look at that picture. I always love to show this to college kids because what movie is that picture from? Wall Street, remember? This movie was made in 1986. If you want to see how I think this picture, better than anything else, summarizes and highlights the technological revolution we've lived through, right? Look at that thing he's holding in his hand, right? It's a brick with little antennas coming out of it. Now now here's the amazing thing. Does anybody want to guess? Seriously, anybody want to take a guess at what that contraption cost in 1986 when that movie was made? $4,200. $4,200 for a cell phone. Now they damn near give them away for free, right? And that's what this technological revolution, one of the reasons to be optimistic about the U.S. economy and the global economy is we're living in this technological age, which is going to cause a big, big boom. If I may, can I just take 3 more minutes and now let me get to the heart of what's wrong. And I think what is the greatest challenge to our country, and I'd love to get your feedback on this when we do the Q&A. We have sinned. We have sinned fiscally in this country, and we've put ourselves in a gigantic hole. And if you look at this chart, this is the defense budget and the non-defense budget in the U.S. Over the last 25 years or so. You can see, if you want to know the kind of quick story of our fiscal history over this period, you can see that the first big thing that happened is that Reagan wins the Cold War, right? We win the Cold War. The Soviet Union, the evil empire, is in dissolution. We have a big peace dividend. You can see the big reduction in the defense budget that happened in the early 1990s as a result of the fact that the Soviet Union was no longer a menace to society. And you can see that we had about $100 billion of savings. And then in 1994, something very important happened. Republicans took over Congress for the first time in 40 years. Bill Clinton was in the White House. That combination of a Republican Congress and a Democrat, a fiscally conservative Democrat and Bill Clinton in the White House, you can see over the next 6 years or so, we had very little growth in the budget. You can see that. In fact, this is an amazing statistic. It's almost troubling to tell you the statistic, but in the year 2000, we had a $200 billion budget surplus. Remember that? We had a $200 billion budget surplus in 2000. Now, I've been kind of ragging on the Democrats. Let me kind of poke fun at my friends who are Republicans. Look at what happened to the budget, Scott, when the Republicans took over. I'm embarrassed to show you this as a Republican. The Republicans are supposed to be the party of fiscal responsibility and balanced budgets. Look at what happened to the budget. Now look, the defense budget obviously went way up because of 9/11. My office in New York at the World Financial Center is right across the street from Ground Zero. So I think about that every day. And there's no question in my mind. I thank God that George Bush did what he did to fight the war on terrorism, because I think it was a great success, and I think the payoff to that, it was the fact that we got that son of a bitch bin Laden, which I just think was a great, great moment for this country. But look, we spent more on Homeland Security and defense, But look at the non-defense budget, Scott. Look what the Republicans were doing. I mean, at the same time as we're spending more money on guns, we're spending more money on butter. So much so that by 2006, I think the voters were fed up. And I wrote an editorial. How many of you ever heard of something called the Bridge to Nowhere in Alaska? How many of you heard? Most of you have, right? I don't know if you know this, Scott, but I wrote the first editorial ever on the Bridge to Nowhere. And this was a symbol of Republican excess. The Republicans spent $200 million on this bridge. It was to connect a small town in Alaska with an island. Anybody know how many people live on that island? 55 people. So I did the calculations in our editorial. It would have cost less money for the taxpayers, for all of us in this room, to have purchased a Learjet for everybody on that island rather than build that damn bridge. And what happened was Republicans got thrown out of office, I think rightfully because of their fiscal misbehavior. But ladies and gentlemen, then look at what happens under Barack Obama. And I think this is the failure, the big failure of President Obama's policies. Look at what happened to the massive increase in spending over this period. And then you have to ask the question, okay, when this money was sent to Washington, what really happens to it? I mean, this is the question that everybody around the country always asks me. Where does that tax money go? And here is the answer to that question that you've all been looking for an answer to, right? I mean, this answers that question. And this was based on a very sophisticated study we did that shows that half of your tax dollars are pissed away down a rat hole or flushed down a toilet. Now, let me just summarize. I believe the single greatest issue for our country is competitiveness. How are we going to make America number one again in this global economy? And the way I like to put this is that for everyone in this room, for everyone, all of us, throughout our lifetimes, the United States has been the unrivaled economic superpower. And I would make the case that this is a great, 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 noble country, and that we have been a force for good, not evil, in this world. But now, for the first time, in any of our lifetimes, I would submit to you, we do have an honest-to-goodness rival. And who is that? It's China, right? And what's happening in China is unbelievable. I mean, China is growing like gangbusters. It's amazing. If you want to see the superiority of capitalism versus communism, just look what happened in China, a country that for hundreds of years couldn't even feed itself, and now as they've moved, they're not a totally capitalist free market economy, but they've certainly moved dramatically in that direction. And they've had rates of growth 8, 9, 10%, an amazing performance, a miracle of human history. And so about a year and a half ago, I'll tell you this last story. We had a meeting at the Journal with the economic minister of China up in New York. And there were 8 of us sitting around the room with this guy. He's a big muckety-muck in the Beijing government. He's number 4 in the chain of command. And he was very arrogant, talking about all the wonderful things that are happening in the Chinese economy. And at one point he said, you know, by the end of 2010, because we met with him in mid-2010, he said, we will become the 2nd largest economy in the world. And did you see that happen? It should have been the biggest headline of any newspaper in a couple of years. China just surpassed Japan as now the 2nd largest economy in the world. And then he said something that really stuck in my craw. He said, by our computer models in Beijing, we believe in 7 years, by about the year 2018 or 19, we will catch the United States. And he said, and once we catch you people, he didn't quite put it like this, but this is the way it came out. He said, we're just going to speed right by you and look at you through our rearview mirror as we just, zoom ahead of you. And, you don't know me all that well, but I couldn't take this much longer. I mean, if you cut me, I bleed red, white, and blue. So I sprang out of my seat. You're not supposed to do this at these meetings, but I was very exercised by all this. So I said, sir, I just want to tell you what you've accomplished in China is, I want to salute you for your economic progress. I said, but not in my lifetime, sir. Will China surpass the United States? And I said, the reason I can tell you with full assurance that that will not happen is because our Chinese are so much smarter than your Chinese. He didn't like that very much, right? But it is true. And I tell that story for this simple reason, that when I walked out of that meeting, I was a little bit afraid, because China, I became convinced that the Chinese leaders, all they think about, they are hyper obsessed with competitiveness. How do they make China number one in every single important industry, whether it's energy, or whether it's military, or whether it's manufacturing, or whether it's pharmaceuticals, or just down the line. They have a strategy to be the number one and to be competitive. And I think the challenge for our country and our political leaders is to get focused on competitiveness, because I have no doubt, and I'm going to end on this optimistic note, that this U.S. economy is set for a ferocious expansion. If we have the right set of policies and the right set of politicians, turning the right dials in Washington, we're going to see the biggest boom you ever saw. I really believe that. There's $2 trillion of money that's just sitting on the sidelines, waiting for the right pro-growth set of policies. It is going to come, and the really exciting thing is that a state like North Dakota is going to lead the way. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Steve, thank you very much for those great comments, and I think most of all that last slide we certainly enjoyed, so thank you very much. Our MC today has been a daily fixture on the radio in the Red River Valley since 1986. His Common Sense Club radio show is heard in North Dakota and Minnesota. His website, ScottHennon.com, has nearly 400,000 unique monthly visitors. Please welcome Scott Hennon.
Thank you, Craig. All right, we're going to, in just a moment here, bring up our three panelists and continue this conversation on the economy regionally as well as nationally. Steve's done a nice job of giving us a great overview of the global and national economic situation, and I want to thank Steve for being a good friend over the years. It's amazing how many friendships you can make over the radio, and I have many, and he's one of them. And he, along with I believe the Wall Street Journal editorial page, is a national treasure in the education of the economy that it does for so many people. They do a fantastic job, and it is required reading for sure. I want to quickly thank the folks that provided the transportation for Steve to get out here. We have a group of folks visiting from Texas, Select Energy Services. Where's our table over there? The gang from Andy and Dale and Linda and Dustin. Give a wave over there. Thank you very much. Appreciate the folks from Select Energy Services. They're water pumpers, is what they would say. They provide a lot of water for the oil and gas industry, and we appreciate them being here today as well. We're going to take Steve on a tour after today's activities. We're heading west, and we're going to head to coal country. Bob and his crew will be hosting us out at the Freedom Mine, and so we'll get a chance to see that, and then we're going to head to the oil patch. And we're planning on Watford City if the weather holds, but otherwise Williston. And my energy tour guide and our tour guide for today for Steve is our Public Service Commission member and candidate for Congress, Kevin Kramer. Kevin, thank you very much for hosting us. Kevin's over there as well. All right, this morning we're going to hear from three industry leaders that I think will give us a great perspective on how the economy here is faring and how that interacts with the national economy to give us their economic overview and also insight for what's to come for the rest of 2012. I'll call each of them up. They'll take a seat here, and then we'll hear from each of them individually and then do a little Q&A between Steve and I as well. So the first is Sean Doverstein. Sean is Executive Director of the Hector International Municipal Airport Authority. Going to talk about the economic impact of a robust and diversified air service, very integral, as well as the vital importance of support from the business community to retain and attract additional air service opportunities. Sean, come on up, grab a spot. Give a hand for Sean. Peter Christensen is the President and Chief Operating Officer of Titan Machinery. Peter will talk about the agriculture perspective on our region's economic outlook. And of course, Titan represents a diversified mix of agriculture, construction, and consumer products with dealerships located throughout the country. Peter, come on up. And Robert Benson, the President and CEO of the North American Coal Corporation, is going to talk about the local impact of the energy industry and the economic opportunities it presents. The North American Coal Corporation is a subsidiary of NACCO Industries, mines and markets lignite coal primarily as fuel for power generation, and Scott Handy can tell you about that, right? And provides selected value-added mining services as well for other natural resources companies. Bob, come on up, grab a spot. A hand for our guest, Bob Benson. And Steve, if you want to come on up and bookend in the end there, what we'll do is we'll go through each of these presentations, just kind of a brief 5-minute overview of their thoughts, and then Steve and I will kind of interact with each of them, and then we'll open this up at the end for Q&A from the audience as well. Chamber staff will be out there with the microphones, and you can ask questions of Steve or any of the folks on our panel. All right, so our first presenter, originally from Wheaton, Minnesota, started his tenure with the Fargo Airport in 1991. Is the Fargo Airport great or what? Isn't it fantastic? I mean, I am traveling more and more these days, and I'm just always amazed when people say, you know, Fargo, why do you live in Fargo? I say, well, one, I love it there. Two, my commute's about 8 minutes. How long's yours? And second of all, I can you know, leave my house at you know, 4:45, be on a plane at 5:15, and where you need to be, and then back at home at night. And I always love the fact that you can land and have your head on the pillow within about 25 minutes. You know, just the efficiency is great, so I love it. And Sean has done a great job overseeing the extensive upgrades of the facility, the runway expansion, multiple terminal expansions, enhancements to their air service that keeps growing. He's also played a pivotal role in retaining the North Dakota Air National Guard base in Fargo during the base closures. How many hooligan fans here, huh? We love the hooligans in the Air National Guard and their history. And also the foreign trade zone, very instrumental in getting that established here, a very important part of giving Fargo-Moorhead a competitive edge in economic development. An NDSU grad, past president, and passionate supporter of those team makers, and chair as well of the Chamber Board of Directors from 06 to 07, Sean Doberstein. Go ahead, Sean.
Thank you, Scott, and thanks to Craig Whitney and the Chamber for the invitation to participate today. If you arrived to hear President Prashani from North Dakota State University, well, you're out of luck. I'm the fill-in. I will acknowledge the members of the Municipal Airport Authority who volunteer their time to serve on the Airport Authority Board. Our 2012 Chair is Don Calander. Our Vice Chair is Steve Blazek, Dr. Virginia Clark Johnson, Ken Pollock, and retired Major General Alex McDonald. When you have a chance, please express your appreciation to these 5 individuals for the amount of time they give to improve all aspects of aviation services for our region. Convenient, affordable air service is an important requirement of every community's ability to be successful. The success is measured by a combination of existing business growth over a period of time, along with new businesses that establish themselves in our region during that same period. We believe that you, the business community in our region, recognizes the importance of air service that has allowed us to work together to increase opportunities. How many businesses would we have in our community if we did not have commercial air service? The answer would be not many. Commercial passenger service began to operate in our community in 1931 with Northwest Airlines, now known as Delta Airlines. Today we provide nonstop jet service to 8 markets. Delta provides 8 flights per day to Minneapolis-St. Paul and 1 flight per day to Salt Lake City. A second Salt Lake City flight operates during the summer season. United Airlines provides 4 flights per day to Chicago O'Hare and 4 flights per day to Denver. American Airlines provides 3 flights per day to Chicago O'Hare, and everyone's favorite Allegiant Air provides a minimum of 2 flights per week to Las Vegas and Phoenix Mesa with seasonal service to Orlando and Los Angeles. We're currently averaging 30 commercial arrivals and 30 commercial departures each day. I was hired as the assistant to the executive director in 1991. Hector Airport had 181,000 passengers board aircraft in 1991. The goal of the board at that time was to maintain 20,000 boardings each month. Passenger boardings increased by over 100% in less than 20 years, with over 366,000 boardings in 2010, which was our record year. Total passengers on and off exceeded 730,000. This is a significant increase in passenger boardings for a metropolitan community of our size. Our passenger boardings were down 3.5% in 2011. This was primarily due to Allegiant reducing their flight operations to address the increased fuel costs, along with additional seasonal adjustments based upon their historical passenger traffic patterns in our market. We ended 2011 with a record December and started 2012 with a record January. The trend is moving in the right direction. In 2011, we averaged 1,290 seats per day that were available for sale. Consumers filled an average of 960 seats per day for an average load factor of 74%. Based upon U.S. Department of Transportation statistics for Fargo, on average, over 700 passengers per day are flying to domestic destinations via Delta, American, and United. Over 200 passengers per day are flying Allegiant Air, and over 70 passengers per day are flying to international destinations. Our daily international passenger count continues to increase year over year. The DOT data indicated we averaged 26 international passengers per day in 2002. We have experienced over a 60% increase in daily international originating passengers, and that's extremely incredible. Increased fuel costs continue to be a major concern for the aviation industry, let alone other sectors of the economy. Airlines are continually monitoring each of their markets. No market is immune to additional seat capacity reductions as the airlines deploy their limited aircraft resources to markets where they expect to at least break even. The Air Transport Association reports that a 1 cent per gallon increase in the cost of jet fuel will cost the U.S. airline industry an additional $175 million per year. A $1 per barrel increase will cost the U.S. airline industry an additional $415 million per year. It was increased fuel costs in 2008 that led to most carriers starting to charge passengers for checked baggage. The Air Transport Association reported that U.S. airlines collected over $5.7 billion in baggage fees in 2010, followed by well over $6 billion in 2011. Shareholders demand a return on their stock investment, and that led to, obviously, the increased baggage costs. You've probably noticed our average fares have increased slightly over the past 2 years. This has been a trend since Frontier departed our market in April 2010 when they decided to eliminate the Q400 aircraft from their fleet. The most recent DOT data released in December of 2011 indicated our average one-way fare is $210 without fees and taxes. This ranked as the 30th highest fare of the top 200 domestic U.S. origin and destination passenger markets in the United States. In 2010, our average one-way fare was $197. You might recall that we had the third highest airfares in the country back in 2002. The efforts are paying off. The Municipal Airport Authority has partnered with the Greater Fargo-Moorhead Economic Development Corporation, the Fargo-Moorhead Convention and Visitors Bureau, and the Chamber to improve air service opportunities for our region. I could spend the next hour conveying to you examples of what airports and their business community partners have done to attract or retain commercial air service in their community. In short, it takes cash, significant amounts of cash that is provided to interested airlines to establish service in a community. The funds are primarily used by the airline as a revenue guarantee to make sure that the carrier will break even for at least the first year of service. Millions of dollars are committed to air service incentive programs by businesses and communities all around the country to attract service. The Airport Authority, Greater Fargo-Moorhead EDC, and the Convention Bureau providing a local cash match of $750,000 to a DOT Small Community Air Service grant that was awarded to the Airport Authority last year. The primary use of the grant is to work with American Airlines to establish nonstop jet service to their hub in Dallas-Fort Worth. American is continuing to analyze the market opportunity. This is the same grant that was awarded to the Airport Authority a few years ago that led to Delta establishing our service to Salt Lake City. The grant helped them to offset a portion of their operational costs for the first year of service. We still have more work to do, and we need to continue to work together with you, our business community, to improve service and lower fares, knowing the impact of lowering fares is positive for the consumers, but tends to be negative to the legacy carriers' market profitability. Access to affordable, convenient air service will continue to play an important role in our community and surrounding region. There's two other items that I'll briefly mention, and Craig touched on one a little bit. Ector Airport is home to the 119th North Dakota Air National Guard Happy Hooligans. We're extremely concerned about the impact the current federal budget proposal could have on the unit. The current budget does not fund a manned aircraft for the unit. The Airport Authority relies on the North Dakota Air National Guard to provide our FAA-required aircraft rescue and firefighting services that is required by the FAA for our commercial airline operations. If for some reason the Air National Guard was not able to continue providing this service, the Airport Authority would need to provide that at a significantly higher cost, the cost of which would be passed on to the air carriers, which would be negative to our efforts for air service development and expansion. The Fargo-Moorhead Air National Guard Support Group, the Chamber Military Affairs Leadership, and Chamber President and CEO Craig Whitney are working together with the congressional delegation and the governor to advocate for a manned aircraft mission in Fargo for the Air National Guard. We hope that they are successful. The second thing I'd like to mention, and I was asked if the Bakken oil field is having an impact on aviation in Fargo, and it is. Fargo Jet Center is now providing charter service to Minot and Williston and other airports in western North Dakota. A reservation system has been set up on their website, and you can check that out for more information. The service is becoming more popular each week, and I'm happy to report that Fargo Jet Center continues to be ranked as one of the top 10 fixed-base operators in the country. We're fortunate to have them and their quality aviation services that they provide to our community. They are the welcome mat for a lot of business people that show up in our community to check us out and see what we're all about, and they do a phenomenal job with that. Thanks again to the Chamber for the opportunity to participate this morning.
Steve and I'll just throw a few questions Sean's way here, and then we'll introduce our next panelist. Sean, you've done a good job of schooling me up on the connection between, you know, it's sort of a chicken or egg thing, but I use Microsoft as an example. Steve, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but Microsoft has its largest non-Redmond campus here. And actually Bill Gates' paycheck is generated right here because the lowest cost per transaction in the entire Microsoft worldwide system is in Fargo. A good work ethic, you know, example of our work ethic. Now, Microsoft can put more people here and continue to expand if they can get people in here from all over. Talk about the interaction just in the economic development area, how air service goes hand in hand with the expansion of these companies.
Well, it's extremely important for Microsoft to have great global connectivity. The executive briefing center that they have here is one of the testaments to the international traffic that arrives and departs from our community. And it's public knowledge that we've been working with Don Morton and his team, along with the Redmond team, to look at the possibility of establishing nonstop service to Seattle. We had meetings last year, and we hope that at some point in the not-too-distant future, we'll be able to justify that. There is a substantial cost associated with doing so. The DOT statistics in terms of Fargo-Seattle, every day we have 28 people on average that depart Fargo for Seattle, and the same is true. 28 people per day on average depart Seattle for Fargo. So we believe that the justification is there, and the more that we can do for Microsoft and other globally traveled companies that are in our economy here in Fargo, I think the more air service that we'll be able to attract into our community.
Atlanta's another one you're working on, right? You like that? That must have been a Microsoft employee, right? Seattle Direct, thank you. Yeah.
Atlanta is something that we have worked with Delta for a little over 7 years, and Delta's mantra is that they do not want to fly over a hub, meaning to fly over Minneapolis and put traffic on a different route. The stage length is long. We're about 1,200 miles from Atlanta. It would take a CRJ 900 aircraft minimum to operate that flight. And the cost, obviously, is certainly significant. Atlanta will provide a significant gateway for better international connectivity and to a number of locations in the southeast part of the country.
Steve is a frequent flyer. Any questions for Sean and how it interacts with the economy?
No, I just think it's amazing. I completely concur with everything you said about the importance of a first-class airport to being a first-class city. So those statistics that you cited were amazing, and I hope we continue to see growth in the flights. You know, I wish you had a direct flight to Washington, D.C., although I'm not so sure that would be such a good thing.
Keep our members of Congress home more, right? Or a little easier for them. Tell them about the cattle. They actually, there's a neat freight element of what happens here and how that connects with the economy too, but I love this story about literally cattle being transported internationally on a 747 on a Fargo.
Yeah, well, 2 years ago, Dan and Bill Price approached us about exporting their cattle, a contract that they established in Kazakhstan. So 2 years ago, we started the first airlift of red heifers going to Kazakhstan, Black Angus and Hereford cattle, and about 2,000 head were shipped in 2010. And once again in 2011 we had another 2,000 head of red heifers that were shipped to Kazakhstan, and it appears that there's 8 more years in that contract. So sometime again this year, Bill and Dan Price through North Dakota Global Beef will be back in Fargo, and Korean Air had the contract. Everybody saw the big blue 747-400. They put anywhere from 160 to 180 head on each of those aircraft, and if you go on our website or Fargo Jet's website, I think there's a YouTube video of a full operation of that aircraft once it arrives and they start loading the cattle and it takes off. But it's really amazing to be part of that, and we're thankful that they picked Fargo to start the journey of exporting great North Dakota beef to Kazakhstan.
That's a neat story. And he mentioned also the Fargo Jet Center service. I'm a regular participant. I saw Greg from Rick Electric here as well, and some others from Wansik who are regular participants. I tell you, if you're either doing business in the Bakken or exploring opportunities, it's a great way to go. And I know I interact with a lot of people who come here from all over the country to explore opportunities out there, and I often tell them about the great service into Fargo that allows them then to take advantage of that service right into the Bakken, because it's, as we found out today with the weather, it's not easy to get to Watford City or Williston or Tioga. They have the strips, but with the weather, so it helps to be able to get into Fargo and zoom right in. So that's a great service that Mr. Sweeney and company are doing. Thank you, Sean. Appreciate it very much. Big hand for Sean and our first presenter. Our next panelist is Peter Christensen with Titan Machinery, President and Director since January 2003, Chief Operating Officer since April of 2011. He was also Chief Financial Officer before that. Before joining Titan, he Actually, and since 1988, was partner and owner of CI Farm Power and the operator of 2 of the dealership locations acquired by Titan Machinery in 2002. Third-generation agriculture equipment dealer, 27 consecutive years of owner-operator profitability, contributing to this great economy. A graduate of St. John's University, currently resides in West Fargo. Let's hear next from Peter Christensen, Titan Machinery. Come on up, Peter.
Thank you. I've got a few slides here to just kind of give you an overview of our agricultural side of the business. The first one looks at the projected long-term growth in the agricultural area. And there are 3 major growth drivers that we've been looking at that are contributing to this strong ag economy that we've been experiencing in North Dakota and throughout the whole upper Midwest. The first one, and I'll have some slides on these, but the first one is the income growth in these developing countries and how important that is and how that's driving demand for our commodities. The second long-term growth driver is the increased demand for biofuels and what impact that's had. And finally, the impact of all the technological advances. We've seen that through the seed technology, through the equipment, of course, we're biased to that. And a major change in the business has been the incorporation of GPS global positioning throughout all of our equipment that we're using in ag production, and it's had a huge impact. This chart is really interesting. The red line is the BRIC countries, and what this is looking at is it's looking at the number of households that have disposable incomes over $10,000. And really what that represents is when they get at that level, their demand for meat goes up. And so as these economies develop, it takes about 3 times the amount of cereal grain to produce protein in the form of meat as it does when they're just eating the grain. And so as we see that happening, what you can see is there's rapid growth, and as of about 2011, the number of those households in these BRIC countries is the equivalent of the number that are in the United States. Now what's interesting is within 5 years, there will be more of those households demanding meat in those countries than both the United States and Europe combined. And so that's a huge driver. Just recently now, you know, there's been a demand on the market where China is in buying soybean. And all of that is creating this underpinning where we see that demand for those commodities that we produce here in North Dakota. And so another interesting fact is when we talk about soybean production, 4 out of 5 of the U.S. soybean acreage, the top counties, are in North Dakota for the whole United States. And so one of the things that's happened from the time I was growing up in Elbow Lake, Minnesota, is that it used to be a lot more wheat and barley and cereal grain here, and what you've seen happen is the migration of first soybeans and then corn have come up through this region, and it has huge impact on both the dollars that we produce off the land and also those inputs that are so important to create those crops. This is just a kind of looking at, you know, one of the other long-term demand growth drivers is the ability for us now to produce fuel in addition to food off of our agricultural production. And this is just showing the ethanol production in North Dakota from 2007 through 2011, and you can see a dramatic increase in that production capacity. And they just continue to need to use the production that we're seeing coming out of the corn. They look at the ethanol industry growing from 13.5 billion gallons to 15 billion gallons by 2015. And so that's going to continue to be a driver. This slide here is looking at the, I talked about the corn production, soybean production, and how that's changed so dramatically. This corn production in the last 5 years and 10 years has just been incredible what's happened. First, that it's come into our area, but more importantly, that the technologies have allowed us to just about double the yield per acre. And so that's really critical. Our yield was 79 bushel per acre in 1995 and 132 bushels per acre in 2010. And part of that is the seed genetics have changed dramatically. They have corn that will take the shorter days that we have here, and we still get the yield. In addition to that, I have to put a plug in for our equipment. We keep supplying the producers this equipment that they can get more productivity per man hour, they can get more productivity per fuel costs, and there's just been a huge increase on that efficiency. And then this GPS that I talked to earlier, that's had a huge impact as well. It used to be where a lot of the times when they were out farming, you'd see it, everyone wants to be proud of what they do out in their fields, and so they would probably be overlapping. I see some people smiling in the crowd here, but they'd overlap maybe 10 or 15% just to make sure they didn't show that skip. And now, if you're out there and you're operating a machine and it's 60 feet wide, you punch in 59.8, and guess what? You're within 4 inches and it's exactly on. And so the savings for fuel, for fertilizer, for seed and everything has been a huge impact over the last 5 years. We have all of our new equipment that we get from the factory has that integrated into it. And so it's basically 100% take rate on new equipment. This is just looking at, since 2000, both the revenue and inputs, and this gets to the impact on North Dakota. You know, we have the same number of acres in production, but what's happened is both the commodity prices and the cost of the inputs have both gone up. And then I talked to you earlier about this increase in yield due to the technologies. And so what's happening is you just see a much stronger impact on what the ag impact is on the economy in North Dakota and the surrounding states. We're just short of $8 billion of total revenue coming out of the ag sector. And then, you know, following that, of course, is all of the inputs that are required to create that. And I just, you know, talked about some of those inputs on the bottom here, where it's fuel, it's fertilizer, it's seed, chemical, and let's not forget the equipment dealer. And then, of course, we have to have the manpower and all the employees required to do that too. So that's kind of an overview of what we see the economic impact being. Last fall, when we talk about current conditions, last fall we had a very favorable fall so that they were able to go out and get the crops off, and they had a really low cost of harvest. There was very little drying required, and that can really impact what they actually have as net income after it's all done. They had very low drying costs. They were able to go out and they were able to do all of the tillage, and they were able to get all of their fertilizer pretty much set, so that this spring, you know, we always look at our business on an annual production cycle, and we feel like we're really positioned in a good spot starting out the 2012 production cycle. And so we see good things for 2012. Thank you.
And Peter, Stephen, I'll just throw a couple questions your way. One I would have right away is on input costs. I mean, the line looked good where revenue's, you know, outpacing the input costs. You obviously got a fuel spike going on right now. When you look at that, you still is that put any dampen at all on your concerns, on your optimism rather for 2012?
Well, that will have it across 8 states, and we also have built out the construction equipment side of the business as well, and the energy out in the western part of the states had a pretty big impact on that in the last couple of years.
So 8 stores. We started with 6 for David and 4 for you, and now 8 states, and how many stores?
We're right at 94.
Is that stores. Not great or what? I mean, that's incredible. You know, good old-fashioned.
Thank you.
Neat story. Steve?
Just a question from a dumb East Coaster, but is agriculture or energy a bigger sector of the economy here today in North Dakota?
I'm not sure I could answer the energy side of it. I know where agriculture is.
I've heard some recent numbers about the fact that 2012 is just going to explode. Ag has been the gorilla, and energy is fast becoming the gorilla. In fact, I've heard some numbers that 2011, we don't know the numbers yet for 2011, but 2011 will have ag at about, $7 billion, $7.5 billion in our GDP, 7.5, yeah. And energy combined at 8. Okay. So oil, and that might cause some people to go, are you kidding me? But I mean, oil has just exploded, obviously, and what Bob and David and the guys would know, coal's about $1 billion. About $1 billion on that. So
billion.
The oil, coal, gas together would be about $8 billion. That's preliminary numbers, but that's the talk. So energy is really zooming in there. But ag has been big piece of that. Peter, thank you. Big hand for Peter. Very informative. Well, speaking of energy, our next presenter is Robert Benson, President and Chief Executive Officer of the North American Coal Corporation. Joined North American Coal in 1976, over 40 years experience in engineering and management positions in the construction and mining industry. Graduate in civil engineering from the University of North Dakota, management development program from the University of Chicago, advanced management program from Harvard University. Lives in Fairview, Texas, but by golly, he's from Lakota, North Dakota. Is that not great or what? Give a big hand for Robert Benson. Bob, come on up. There you go, sir.
Thank you.
Yep.
This is kind of like coming home for me. I get back to North Dakota fairly often, but it's always a great time, and it's amazing to come into a room like this and hear people talk so right-wing, you know. For those of us in the coal business, we like to hear that, you know. We kind of get blasted all the time. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about North American Coal. We're pretty old, 99 years old. We started in 1913 back in Ohio, all in underground operations. And then in 1957, made the big move to North Dakota when they bought the Indian Head Mine near Zap, and some of you in here probably did the zip to Zap, right? My wife wouldn't let me go to Zap. Later on, when I had to work at Indian Head, I was kind of wishing I hadn't gone to Zap. But we got through it, and these pictures here show what some of the old equipment looked like. It's changed a little bit. This is a picture of the way things are at Falkirk today. This is our mine near Underwood. We have a 124-yard drag line removing the overburden. There's a 19-yard shovel loading coal into 200-ton trucks. And those trucks, believe it or not, go about 55 miles an hour loaded. And then we have a 17-yard drag line uncovering the bottom seam. And here's a shot of some reclaimed land at our Beulah mine, all the sunflowers. And here's another shot of some reclaimed land over in Beulah. And this land has been mined, reclaimed, and it's now being harvested and cropped. Everybody hears a lot about safety in the coal mining business. Well, North American Coal takes safety very, very seriously. And there's the award called the Sentinels of Safety Award. It's the most honorable award you can receive. It's for the safest surface coal mine in the United States. We have received that award 3 times, twice at our Beulah mine and once at our mine in Sabine, Texas. Now, I'm just going to put in a little bit of a plug here for the industry, but we're working very, very hard on safety, and you would think that the federal government would be doing the same thing. It's now being rumored that the Mine Safety and Health Administration is going to pull out of this award presentation, which is just simply, I can't understand what's going on with them. Maybe it's part of Obama's mission to put the coal people out of business. This graph here, quite honestly, it's a little bit hard for me to read, so I'm going to take a guess at which one it is. I got a little bit of an issue with one eye, so it's, but we'll get there. The electrical generation from coal since 1970 has increased. I believe it's about 163%, and the GDP is up about 97%. At the same time, NOx emissions have gone down by 50%, SO2 by 70%. In fact, if any of you watch CNBC, a couple months ago, Nick Akins, President and CEO of AEP, was on, and he talked about emissions, total emissions being reduced by about 80%. And he says that the cost to get to the next 20% is going to far exceed what it costs to get the first 80%. Coal is very, very abundant. The United States is kind of the OPEC of the coal business. We have about 20, I believe it's 24% of the reserves here in the United States. China, you see, is about, I think it's about 13%. India is about 7%. But China and India are really the ones that are really developing their coal business full speed ahead. As far as the supplying of electricity, coal supply is responsible for about 45% of the coal or electricity generated today, and that is a little bit more than natural gas and nuclear combined, which is told is about 44. You notice there's a section on there for reliable. I always say that coal or renewable. I always say that coal is a renewable fuel too. It's just a matter of timing. Lignite is about 65 million years old. This chart here is really good. This is one of the best ones I've seen. North Dakota has the third lowest cost of electricity in the United States. This charts all of the states and District of Columbia. And the two states to beat North Dakota would be Idaho and Washington. And I would assume that's primarily due to the hydropower. And I believe back in the old days when they built these dams, they never rolled the capital cost in, so the numbers are a little bit skewed. You see, Minnesota's at number 23. Now, Washington, D.C. is a little bit higher up. But it's hard to put a handle on that one because I did not find a category for hot air. So, and I haven't seen very many wind generators back there either. It's kind of like, you know, not in my backyard. And then on the high end, we've got the coastal states. And they're the ones that support all this global warming business and all these new regulations. And you kind of wonder, why is that? Well, they're losing business every day. You know, I live in Texas, and it's a mass movement of businesses to Texas where there's low-cost energy, but I think the people on each coast would like to see everybody else's prices go up. We've got the economic impact, I guess we just mentioned here just a few minutes ago, but for the lignite industry, it's about $1 billion in this region. The tax revenue, state tax revenue, is about $93 million, and we have about 4,000 jobs, direct jobs in the lignite side, and about 24,000 indirect. This is some really disturbing statistics, but I thought it was important everybody get to see these. There's 307 million people in the United States. And we have about 2.6 billion that live on less than, what, $2 a day? And we got 2 billion that have very limited access to electricity. We have 1.5 billion that have no access to electricity. This really, really is obvious when you go to India. And I go into India quite often, and it's really a sight to see. I took my wife over there a couple of years ago, and on the way home, she's watching the movie Slumdog Millionaire, and she says, "Why didn't you just buy the DVD? We could have saved the airplane ticket." And there's an awful lot of truth to that. It's really something. But I've been going over to India for about 15 years now, and each time I go back, it seems to be improving. It's getting much better. The last time I was there, the hotel I stayed at, it's the Taj Hotel, it's at the Gateway in Mumbai, and the area around there was very, very clean. I couldn't believe it. It was just amazing how the Indians had cleaned up the city right in that area. And I mentioned it to the people in the hotel, and they said, "Oh, that's because your president is coming over in a couple of weeks." And by the way, the president rented the entire hotel and had to compensate the businesses and everything. It was just absolutely obscene. Here's some of the developing countries. You can see what's happening, like in China. The rapid growth in coal is just huge. And in India, you can also see growth in coal. Irregardless of what everybody says about coal and global warming and all that, these developing countries are not going to stop using coal. They need the low-cost energy. And we've got a lot of things facing us, and it's not just the coal industry, but it's everybody in all industries. Now they're after the oil and gas people, all utilities. It's just one thing after another. It seems like, you know, I used to be able to mine coal for my job. Now it seems like we have to go back to Washington and work trying to get things changed. It's a full-time job on regulations. On the export side, there's a lot of coal companies now looking at exporting their coal, and that is not going to help this country because all the low-cost coal here, if it starts going over to Asia, the prices of electricity are going to go up. And we are in the process right now of developing 4 new operations. They're in the permitting and development stage. And it seems like we spend an awful lot of time on the legal side, you know, fighting the Sierra Club and other environmental groups. But these are all very good projects, very clean projects, and we're spending a lot of time on clean coal technology because we also have to start looking at what we can do elsewhere. And in fact, we're involved in a very large project in India, 4,000 megawatts, and we've been doing the technical services, the mine planning, procurement for them, and development work. But tremendous amount of work going on in India, and we're headed on over to China here in April to look into more of the coal to liquids. We have projects on the board that are ready to go if we just knew what the regulations are going to be, and they create a lot of jobs. We've gone ahead and we're permitting a field in North Dakota, a reserve which we have no customer for, and we've never done that before, but we started a process a few years ago. We thought that if we got it permitted, it's kind of like our field of dreams. If you build it, they'll come. But I got to finish on one last slide. This is there's a restaurant in Ohio. The owner of the restaurant likes to put up neat sayings on his marquee. This one I thought was very fitting for this group. His idea is to charge the people in Iraq $128 a bushel for grain. I think it's a great idea. Thank you.
I thought the statistic was pretty amazing, and that, Bob, was you know, your chart about how coal generation is up off the roof here and even exceeding the GDP growth, and yet emissions is exactly the opposite way, which is a narrative that I don't read in the Wall Street Journal, but I do read in about every other paper that's the exact opposite. That you know, dirty coal and you know what it's doing. So it's that chart says a lot there, doesn't it?
Well, if you drive by the power plant, you go up by 83 and you go past the Coal Creek Station, you see that white plume coming out of there. That's not pollution. It's a cloud maker is what that is. It is.
It's amazing. Steve, any questions for Bob? Still letting that sink in.
Well, coming from the land of hot air, you know, I think one of the things that I find fascinating about your presentation, I'd love, by the way, to get your charts. Would those slides be available
yes.
to people? Okay. So, you know, you talk about the efficiency of coal and obviously, you know, what's going on here, not just with coal, but natural gas. And, you know, I was looking at some of these statistics, and the fact that coal is so affordable now, and natural gas has come down so much in price. I mean, natural gas, what, $3? You know, in Europe right now, they're still paying about $10 for natural gas, and they pay more for coal because we're an energy production country. That is a huge advantage for American manufacturing, whether it's the chemical industry, auto industry, whatever industry it is that produces anything. The fact that the United States has the access today to virtually the lowest cost energy in the world is not just good for our energy industry, it's good for every industry that makes things, whether it's agriculture or manufacturing. So I just want to salute what you guys are doing in providing this country with a cheap and abundant source of fuel. If we could just keep Washington off of your back, you know, I think the future of your industry is huge. So I guess the question really is, can we do that? Can we keep Washington, D.C.? Because I'm in that town. They want to shut you down.
Yes.
They want to shut you down. So how are you defending yourself against that assault?
Well, when you take a look at all the numbers of the imported oil, the numbers are staggering. And there's no one sector in the energy side that's going to solve the problem to eliminate imported energy and oil. We have to all work together, and we're talking nuclear, oil, gas, coal, wind, everybody. And it's time that all of these energy groups quit fighting with each other and start working together. You know, some of the ads that you see the gas people doing against coal are absolutely ridiculous.
Right.
Absolutely horrible. And everybody needs to work together. The gas and oil people, if they think by attacking us, putting us out of business, is a success story for them, they're wrong.
Right.
Because they're a fossil fuel and they're the next ones that are going to get it.
Totally agree with you.
It's going to just go on. But we missed the boat in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s on converting, using all of our sources of energy. We can convert coal to gas, jet fuel, pipeline gas. Adolf Hitler ran his war machine by converting coal to liquid fuels, and we can do that here. And I think that's the future of coal in the United States, is for liquid fuels, transportation fuels, and natural gas, and certainly should be used to heating our homes and institutions. We all need to work together, and we're trying very hard through all of our trade associations to get the word out. You know, we don't have the money that the environmental groups have. We don't.
Right.
But we've got votes, and that's what we have to do. We have to go out and mine the votes, and that's our slogan that we use at the National Mining Association. We have got to inform the public and our employees and the people and get everybody out to vote. This election coming up this time is the most important election this country has ever faced. Our kids, our grandkids, their future depends on it. We need you. Hopefully.
Anybody agree with that? No kidding. We're going to take questions next, so if you have a question, raise your hand. But I want to ask Bob this question, speaking of coal to liquids. I know that North American Coal has had projects on the table to do, multi-billion-dollar investment in Minnesota to do just exactly that. Understanding the regulatory environment, is that what's holding that investment back at this point right now?
Right now, it's the uncertainty with the regulations, and with uncertainty in regulations, the finance community is not willing to step up.
So think about that, Steve. Here's one project. What are we talking about? $4 billion? What kind of capital requirements would you have?
We're probably about $3 billion.
So a $3 billion investment that nobody will finance only because they don't know what the EPA is going to do. How many jobs is that preventing across how many sectors of the economy? Right? I mean, that's
a huge number of jobs.
That's the scary part that's going on, and that's just trickles down so many places. So as you talked in your presentation, Steve, about the economy coming back, slowly but surely, but coming back, imagine what it could be if, some certainty was provided on the regulatory side.
Yeah. I think what you said, Bob, is so important about, what they call sort of all of the above with respect to energy. And, look, I'm a skeptical on renewables. I'll say that because I just think that they're not price competitive with a lot of what's going on in coal and natural gas. But our position at the Wall Street Journal, I just want everybody in this room to know this, we don't want the government to pick winners and losers in energy policy, right? Let the best man, let the most efficient source of energy win. And what's going on in Washington right now at the U.S. Department of Energy, they have converted, Scott, you and I have talked about this on the radio many times, Barack Obama has converted the Department of Energy into a venture capital firm, right? I mean, these bureaucrats can't pick winners and losers in energy. And the reason you have disasters like Solyndra is because you've got, the government taking our money and picking who they want to win this race for energy control. So I don't know if you'd agree with me, Bob, but we just feel like let's get the government. If you want to really do something to improve the energy situation in this country, shut down the U.S. Department of Energy.
Exactly.
I really believe that.
Yes.
I'm a radical, I'll admit it.
Which, by the way, was created with the goal of lessening our dependence on foreign energy.
Well,
how's that working out for them?
The other way.
And by the way, required reading today's lead Wall Street Journal editorial is on that very point, on picking winners and losers in the Pickens plan, on that T-Boone Pickens plan on subsidies, right, Steve? Yeah, and a good one. Talked about the fact that Henry Ford didn't have. I like that line. What was the line again? Henry Ford didn't need subsidies to get the Model T going?
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's a good one. All right.
Along those lines about subsidies, when you talk about wind and solar, one thing I just got to add is that my parents and grandparents, they were into this green thing too. They used wind and solar. They didn't have any subsidies whatsoever. They used the clothesline. Pretty effective.
The original green energy. All right, questions from the audience for any Steve or any of our panelists here today. One microphone over there, and we got one over here, so raise your hand, and we'll come to you and get a few minutes of questions in here for the audience. Got one in the back of the room here. Raise your hand over here if you want to go next, and we'll get you in queue.
Harlan here. Pete, I know Titan has got a very interesting philosophy when they absorb or bring in new dealerships and stuff, and I think the group should have an idea of how you kind of approach that acquisition and your philosophy about how you work with that new dealership acquisition.
Yeah, we call that the strong store operating model, and when David and I first talked about what we thought we could do with Titan, one of the things that we both had experience with was, this relationship that the traditional dealer has with their customers and their employees. And so as Titan's expanded, what we do is when we have a dealership join our group, we still keep all of that day-to-day decision making for everything that's focused on the customers and the employees right at the local level. And we want to be part of that community. That's been a very successful model for 80 years since my grandfather got in the business. And then what we do is we have our company headquarters here in West Fargo, and we have a group of people there that just specialize on all the different back office support that we can do by having specialists that support those dealerships out in the communities. And it's really worked well. As we've grown, whether we had 30 dealerships or we had 60 dealerships, nothing changed at the community level, at the dealership level, with the exception that they now have access to a lot more inventory, and we can leverage off of neighboring stores and offer more for the customers.
All right, great. Raise your hand. Don't be shy. Other questions? One over here? Okay. Anybody on this end, raise your hand. We'll get to you that other microphone. Right over here. Go ahead.
I'd like to ask a question of our keynoter. You made a lot of conversation about the importance of competitiveness. And I note that over the past many years, our global competitors are producing more new engineers and scientists than the United States has. Could you offer some perspective on what policy initiatives might tend to address that continuing imbalance?
Is that directed towards me? Or?
That's directed towards you.
Okay. It's a great question. Obviously, if we're going to be a world economic superpower, we have to be training and educating, the next generation of minds. And I think one of the areas where our country has gone far afield is in the area of education. And look, I come in from Washington, D.C., and I grew up in Chicago, Illinois. If any of you ever visited the public high schools in those cities, it would literally bring tears to your eyes that kids have to go to those kinds of schools. So we've got a lot of work to do, Scott. We've got a lot of work to do to create world-class schools in this country. In terms of how we can create more scientists and engineers, I think it has to be stressed at a much earlier age. I think we've got to have much better science programs, starting in the second grade and up. And the other thing I would say is the one big advantage that the United States has over the rest of the world, and the reason I think we will continue to be the economic superpower of the 21st century, is because we have access to the best and the brightest minds and the strongest backs in the world through immigration. I'm a huge proponent of immigration. We should continue to allow people who want to come to this country and become entrepreneurs and become world-class scientists and engineers to do so. It puts us at a huge advantage over the countries that we compete with. And when I was making that kind of smart aleck joke about our Chinese being smarter than their Chinese, I was only half kidding. We have an opportunity in this country to really cherry pick and take some of the greatest minds. And by the way, that when you take this formula, this great formula of taking the best and brightest minds from the rest of the world and bringing them to this country and combining them with Yankee ingenuity, it's just a formula that works. It's worked for 200 years for our country. So yeah, I guess I'd stress we got to really become serious about school reform. I can't speak to your schools here in North Dakota. I'm sure they're a lot better than they are in Washington, D.C. and Chicago, where I'm from, but they're never good enough. So we have to get serious about school reform. We have to emphasize science and engineering and math at an earlier age, and I think we have to take advantage of our immigration system to bring in top talent.
Time for one more question. Got a shy side of the room over here. Got a mic right back there. Right, Bill, go ahead and stand up and be loud.
I'm an engineer as well, electrical engineer from the, in the electric utility industry, and we get 50% of our power from coal in Moorhead, Minnesota. Wall Street Journal article yesterday talking about the lawsuit that's happening right now, I believe in the Court of Appeals in District of Columbia, on EPA, trying to stop EPA from all this train wreck regulation in the energy industry. But the Wall Street Journal article yesterday talked about it, so if you get a chance, read that article. So it's happening right now. The question is in that article it talks about the Institute of Scientists in the United States that overwhelmingly say that we have, that global warming is caused by energy. And, how do we get the scientists to, or concerned scientists, we've heard about concerned scientists, how do we get someone to talk in opposition to what our scientists are saying? Because people trust the scientists, yet I think this issue is an unsolvable question. So how do we get, read the Wall Street Journal article yesterday, and it's being litigated right now today. And maybe Peter, you've got some ideas on that. I'm perplexed.
Well, first of all, there is no, I haven't seen that article, but if it said that there is a scientific consensus on global warming being caused by man-made causes and energy being the primary cause, that's flat out false. That is a false. We have published, as you know, Scott, because you read our editorial page, for years. We've published some of the top climatologists and scientists in the world who have cast real serious doubts about the science of global warming. So I think that it is still, look, there's two issues. One is whether the Earth is actually warming, and the second is whether that warming is attributable to people like this. and I think that the evidence is just look, the planet has changed temperatures over tens of thousands of years. We know that. What caused the last heat wave in this country before CO2 emissions? So I am a global warming skeptic. I think it is completely false to say that there is, what the left wants to do is just pretend that everyone agrees on this, right? But there is no consensus on this. Look, I don't know about you, but when I was in high school in the 1970s, what they were telling us was we're headed to a second ice age.
Yes.
That's what we were told. The apocalyptics were saying not global warming, but we're headed to the second ice age. But here's the most interesting thing about this. I know I'm sitting next to a coal guy, but look, natural gas is a very, very efficient form of getting electricity at lower levels of CO2 emissions. Now, if you think that the environmentalists would be cheering for the natural gas revolution. But what are they doing in states like North Dakota and Wyoming and West Virginia and Ohio? They're trying to prevent it from happening. And so I just find them to be not serious about this. I really liked that chart you showed about the reduction in emissions from coal. That has to get out there. How do we get that information out to people that coal has become, it's not like the coal plants in the 1950s.
Bob, anything you want to comment on that, just about winning the science argument?
The science started back in the early 90s, and there was a lot of studies going on at universities, and we can hook you up with people and can talk more about this, but a lot of the scientists that disagreed with the global warming, all of a sudden their research money stopped.
Yep. It's a big problem.
If you weren't telling the story that certain people wanted to hear, you didn't get the research funds. And there's a huge number of scientists today, and the number is growing, that disagree on the global warming. And whatever happened to ClimateGate? All of a sudden, we don't hear about it anymore. That's a real thing. That did happen, and some people got very, very rich over this thing. And Al Gore who talked about the oceans rising 7 feet. What did he do? He went and bought a home at sea level. You know? The only one in that family that had any brains was his wife, and she left him. You know? So,
We got to get this guy a radio talk
what
show.
can I say?
Oh, I love it. Folks, as we wrap up, we want to let you know that you will be sent a survey to give us some feedback to the Chamber about today's event. We value your input. What you'll find on the tables is an example of some of the handouts that are a direct result of your responding to these information. So when you receive it, please take a moment to let us know what you think. On behalf of the Chamber, again, our presenting sponsor is Cass County Electric Cooperative. Thank you, Scott, and everybody at Cass County Electric, all the sponsors, and thank you for attending the 2012 Economic Outlook Forum. Thank you very much. Any